My daughter looked me dead in the eye at her rooftop birthday party and said, "Mom, please act your age." Her friends laughed softly into their champagne glasses, while I stood there holding the store-bought gift bag she'd already told me not to bring. I smiled anyway. 3 days later, I pulled up to her party in a red Ferrari. Every conversation stopped. But the real shock wasn't the car. It was the man stepping out of the passenger seat. The second my daughter's fiancé saw him, all the color drained from his face. And in that moment, I realized my daughter had been lying to everyone for a very long time. Before I tell you what happened that night, I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever felt invisible just because of your age? Or had someone in your own family make you feel small? Leave me a comment and tell me where you're watching from and what time it is there. And if stories about family heartbreak and second chances mean something to you, don't forget to like and subscribe. I read every single comment. I used to think sacrifice was what love looked like. Not the grand movie kind of love with roses and handwritten letters. I mean the quiet kind. The kind where you worked overtime for 20 years so your daughter could wear clean clothes to school. The kind where you skipped buying new shoes because braces were more important. The kind where you smiled through exhaustion because your child deserved at least one parent who felt steady. That was my life. And for a long time, I was proud of it. I'm Molly Reyes. I'm 67 years old, widowed, and until recently I believed disappearing quietly into the background was just part of becoming a mother. I live alone in a small stucco house outside Phoenix. The same house Robert and I bought in 1989 when interest rates were insane, and we survived mostly on canned soup and hope. Back then, the neighborhood had tiny trees and cracked sidewalks. Now the trees are taller than the roofs, and most of the original couples are either divorced dead or living near their grandchildren in Florida. Robert's been gone 12 years. Sometimes that still shocks me. You never really adjust to sleeping beside silence. He died 2 months after his 63rd birthday. Heart attack. Sudden, cruel. One moment he was complaining about gas prices while grilling burgers, and the next moment I was sitting in a hospital hallway holding his wedding ring in a plastic bag. After that, everything in my life became about survival. And Claire. Especially Claire. My daughter was 28 when Robert died. Beautiful, ambitious. Sharp in a way I never was. Even as a little girl, she hated feeling ordinary. While other kids played house, Claire played CEO. She used to stand on our coffee table giving imaginary presentations with a flashlight pointer she stole from Robert's toolbox. She's gonna run the world someday, Robert always said. And maybe that was the problem. Because somewhere along the way, Claire started believing love only counted if successful people could see it. She moved to Scottsdale in her early 30s and became a luxury real estate agent. Big houses, big clients, bigger smiles. Her Instagram looked like a champagne commercial. Rooftop bars, desert resorts. Designer handbags I knew she couldn't comfortably afford yet. At first, I was proud of her. Then I started noticing something strange. Every time I visited, Claire acted like she needed to edit me before other people saw me. Mom, maybe wear the blue blouse instead. Mom, don't talk about coupons at dinner. Mom, Scottsdale is a little more upscale. At first, I laughed it off. I told myself she was stressed. Young people cared too much about appearances now. That's what I thought. Until the brunch. That was the day something inside me cracked. Claire invited me to brunch at a restaurant called Clementine House. One of those trendy places with white marble tables and tiny servings arranged like modern art. The waiters looked younger than my grandnephew. I wore a soft floral blouse and my favorite silver earrings Robert bought me for our 30th anniversary. The second I sat down, Claire smiled tightly. "Mom," she whispered, "you brought that purse?" I looked down at my purse. Brown leather, worn at the corners. Perfectly functional. "Yes," I said slowly. Her friend Amanda glanced at me, then at Claire. "Oh my God, Amanda laughed lightly. My mom still carries cash in envelopes. The women giggled. I forced a smile. Claire reached across the table. You know what would be fun? She said. We should do a makeover day for you. Amanda clapped. Yes, like one of those transformation shows. Another woman leaned toward me. You'd look 10 years younger, with better hair color. I laughed politely, because that's what women my age are trained to do. Make everyone comfortable, even while they humiliate us. The waiter arrived, and I ordered herbal tea and avocado toast, because I still can't understand why brunch costs $30 now. Claire sighed softly. Mom, you can order a real meal. This is a real meal, I said. Amanda smirked into her mimosa. Claire leaned closer to me. You always do this. Do what, act old? I stared at her. I am old, I said quietly. No, she snapped softly. You act old. There's a difference. The table went silent. Claire immediately smiled again when the others looked over. But I felt it. That sting. That deep, humiliating sting only family can give you. The rest of brunch blurred together after that. I remember Amanda talking about cosmetic surgery. I remember another woman complaining that turning 50 made her feel invisible. And I remember Claire laughing and saying, women just stop trying after a certain age. Something about that sentence settled heavily in my chest. Women stop trying. Was that what Claire thought happened to me, that I had simply given up? She didn't know about the nights I still cried over Robert, or how lonely dinner felt when nobody asked how your day was, or how exhausting it was pretending you were okay because everyone else had moved on from your grief before you did. When brunch finally ended, we walked outside into the Arizona heat. Claire put on oversized sunglasses and checked her phone. Then she looked at me. Mom, she said carefully, I need you to understand something. I waited. My clients are younger now. My social circle is different. People judge everything. I felt my stomach tighten. What does that have to do with me? She hesitated. Then came the sentence that stayed in my head for weeks. Please just act your age. I blinked. I thought I was. No, Mom. I mean, gracefully. Gracefully. Such a cruel word when used the wrong way. I nodded slowly, like I understood. Like she hadn't just reduced my entire existence to something embarrassing she needed managed. Then Claire kissed my cheek quickly and walked toward her white Range Rover, without noticing I hadn't moved. I stood there alone in the parking lot. Women in heels walked past me carrying shopping bags. Music drifted from the restaurant patio. And for the first time in years, I suddenly saw myself the way the world saw older women. Not interesting, not desirable, not alive, just background noise. I got into my old SUV and sat there gripping the steering wheel. Then I looked at myself in the mirror. Gray roots, soft wrinkles, tired eyes. But underneath all of it, I still saw me. And somehow, that hurt even more. The strange thing about grief is that it freezes certain parts of you in time. For 12 years, I still bought the same brand of coffee Robert liked, even though I hated the taste. I still folded towels the way he preferred. I still reached for my phone some mornings, because for half a second, my brain forgot he was gone. You don't realize how much of your identity gets wrapped around another person until they disappear. After the brunch with Claire, I drove home feeling hollow. Not angry, not yet, just small. I remember pulling into my driveway and sitting in the car long after I turned the engine off. The Arizona sun poured through the windshield, making everything too bright, too honest. When I finally walked inside, the house felt unusually quiet. I set my purse down, kicked off my shoes, and noticed the blinking light on my answering machine. Most people don't even have answering machines anymore, but Robert always insisted they were more reliable than voicemail. I pressed play absent-mindedly. Molly. This is Howard Green. Please give me a call when you can. It's regarding Robert. I froze. Howard Green had been Robert's attorney years ago. We hadn't spoken in at least a decade. My stomach tightened instantly. At our age, phone calls that begin with "regarding your husband" are rarely good. I called him back immediately, Howard answered on the second ring. Molly, he said warmly. It's been too long. What happened? I asked before he could continue. He chuckled softly. Nothing bad, at least not now. I sat down slowly at the kitchen table. What does that mean? It means, he said carefully, I found something Robert left behind. For a second, I couldn't breathe. After 12 years, those words hit like a ghost knocking on the door. Howard explained that during a recent audit involving old investment accounts, one particular file resurfaced. Apparently, Robert had invested in a small electric vehicle startup sometime around 2009. I frowned immediately. That can't be right, I said. We didn't have money to invest in anything. Oh, trust me, Howard said with a laugh. I remember that conversation vividly. Robert insisted on putting in a very small amount. How small? 20,000. I nearly dropped the phone. $20,000 had been enormous for us back then. We were saving for Claire's graduate school, I whispered. I know. I suddenly felt irritated. What kind of irresponsible Molly? Howard interrupted gently. You should probably let me finish. Silence. Then he said the sentence that changed my life. That investment is now worth a little over $4 million. I genuinely thought I'd misheard him. What? The company went public last year. Robert held on to every share. I laughed, not because it was funny, because it sounded absurd. $4 million. People like us didn't accidentally become millionaires. That happened to tech boys in hoodies, not widows with arthritis and discount grocery coupons. There has to be some mistake, I said weakly. There isn't. I stared across my kitchen. The old refrigerator hummed softly. A magnet from Sedona hung crooked beside Claire's second-grade report card I'd never taken down. Everything suddenly looked different. Not richer. Just fragile. Howard continued talking about paperwork and accounts and transferring ownership, but my mind drifted somewhere else entirely. To Robert. I could suddenly hear his voice so clearly. Molly, he used to say one day, we're going to stop surviving and actually live. Back then, we were always one emergency away from disaster. Claire needed braces. The transmission failed. The roof leaked. Robert got laid off for 8 months in 2003, and I worked double shifts processing insurance claims while pretending everything was fine. We built our whole marriage around responsibility. There was never extra money for dreams, except once. I smiled faintly despite myself. The Corvette incident. I must have been 32. We were driving through Scottsdale after dinner when a bright red Corvette pulled up beside us at a stoplight. I stared at it a little too long. Robert noticed immediately. You want one? He teased. I laughed so hard I snorted. We can barely afford windshield wipers. One day, he said confidently, I'm buying you a red sports car. I rolled my eyes. You hate sports cars. I hate paying for them, he corrected. That became one of our running jokes. Every time we saw a fancy car, Robert would say, there goes your future midlife crisis vehicle. And every time I laughed. Because it was ridiculous. Women like me didn't have midlife crises. We had responsibilities. Somewhere along the way, I stopped even imagining things for myself. After the call with Howard ended, I walked slowly through the house. Past framed family photos. Past Robert's old reading chair. past the hallway mirror I barely looked into anymore. Then I opened the closet in the spare bedroom. At the very back sat an old cardboard box labeled college. Inside were photo albums, ticket stubs, faded birthday cards, and pieces of a younger version of me I hadn't seen in years. At the bottom was a photograph. Me at 21. Long, dark hair, sunburned shoulders, laughing beside a motorcycle. I stared at that woman for a very long time. She looked fearless, alive. I barely recognized her. When did she disappear? And more importantly, why had I let her that night I couldn't sleep? I kept replaying Claire's voice in my head. Act your age. Maybe she thought aging meant shrinking, becoming quieter, taking up less space, dressing invisibly, wanting less, needing less. But lying awake in the dark, I realized something uncomfortable. I had taught her that. Because after Robert died, I stopped being Molly. I became Claire's mother, the dependable widow, the woman who babysat when needed, the woman who mailed birthday cards with $20 bills tucked inside, the woman who never caused problems, who never drew attention, who slowly disappeared so other people could shine brighter. And suddenly, for the first time in years, I felt angry. Not at Claire, not entirely, at myself. The next morning, I drove to the bank to begin signing paperwork Howard had prepared. The young banker helping me couldn't have been older than 26. He wore a navy suit so tight it looked painted on. Halfway through our meeting, he glanced at my account balance and visibly straightened in his chair. Suddenly, his entire tone changed. "Mrs. Reyes," he said carefully, "would you be interested in speaking with one of our wealth management advisors?" Wealth management? I almost laughed. 3 days earlier, my own daughter had looked embarrassed by my purse. Now, strangers were offering me investment portfolios. It was amazing how differently the world treated you when money entered the room before you did. When I got back home, I stood in my kitchen holding the new account documents. $4 million. Enough money to change everything. Or maybe enough money to reveal what had already been broken. I walked to the hallway mirror and looked at myself again. Gray roots, wrinkles, tired eyes. But this time, I noticed something else too. Possibility. And for the first time in over a decade, I heard myself ask a dangerous question. What if my life wasn't over yet? Claire's 40th birthday party became the center of her universe almost 2 months before it actually happened. Every phone call somehow circled back to it. The florist is charging double because it's spring wedding season. The rooftop venue wants final confirmation by Friday. Do you think ivory roses look richer than white roses? At one point, she spent 20 full minutes talking about custom cocktail napkins. I listened because that's what mothers do, even when their daughters stop really listening back. The guest list matters. Claire told me one afternoon while pacing around her condo with her Bluetooth headset in. There are investors coming. 2 developers from Paradise Valley. Ethan says this party could open major doors for me. I sat at her kitchen island peeling labels off water bottles because Claire said the branded packaging looked cheap. Sounds important, I said gently. It is important. She didn't say it cruelly. That was the strange part about Claire. Most of the time, she didn't even realize when she was hurting people. She had become so obsessed with appearances that everything in life started feeling transactional. Every person was either helping her climb or slowing her down. I just wasn't sure which category I belonged in anymore. A week later, Claire invited me shopping for party outfits. Or at least, that's what she called it. In reality, it felt more like an intervention. We stood inside a luxury department store in Scottsdale, surrounded by white marble floors and perfume so strong it made my eyes water. Claire held up a beige pantsuit. This would be classy on you. I stared at it, It looked like something a retired judge would wear to a funeral luncheon. I don't know, I admitted. It feels a little appropriate, Claire offered. Old. Claire sighed dramatically. Mom, not everything has to be exciting. Something inside me tightened immediately. I glanced toward a nearby mannequin wearing a fitted red dress. Elegant, bold, alive. Claire followed my eyes and laughed softly. Oh no. What, that's not for you? I forced a smile. Of course not. But the truth was, for one tiny second, I had imagined myself wearing it. And apparently, even imagining it was embarrassing. Claire moved through the racks, quickly selecting muted colors, like she was curating my invisibility. Soft gray, navy blue, taupe, everything safe. Everything quiet. Meanwhile, women half my age walked confidently through the store, wearing leather skirts and bright lipstick and expensive heels. Nobody told them to disappear. At one point, Claire held up another blouse. This is nice. I looked at the price tag. $300. For a blouse? She blinked. Mom, you can afford better clothes. There it was again. That shift. Claire still didn't know about the inheritance, but she had started noticing I wasn't panicking over money anymore. Howard had already transferred part of the investment funds into my account, and for the first time in decades, I wasn't calculating grocery totals in my head before reaching the register. Still hearing Claire say it bothered me. Not because she was wrong, because suddenly I realized something sad. My daughter thought being worthy of respect depended on looking expensive. I put the blouse back carefully. I think I'm done shopping. Claire looked irritated immediately. Mom, why are you being difficult? I'm not. You always shut down like this. I almost laughed. Because women my age don't shut down. We retreat quietly after being dismissed enough times. There's a difference. On the drive back to Phoenix, I kept replaying the moment with the red dress in my mind. That's not for you. The words followed me all the way home. That night, I stood in front of my bathroom mirror longer than usual. I touched the soft lines near my mouth, the silver strands near my temples, the loose skin on my neck. I wasn't pretending I looked 35. I didn't want to. But somewhere along the way, society had convinced women that aging gracefully really meant aging invisibly. The next morning, I did something impulsive. I booked a haircut, not a trim, a real haircut. The salon receptionist sounded almost surprised when I asked for a style consultation. At the appointment, a woman named Trina ran her fingers through my hair thoughtfully. When was the last time you changed your look? She asked. I thought about it honestly. Probably the Clinton administration. She burst out laughing, and for the first time in a while, I laughed too. 3 hours later, I barely recognized myself. The heavy shape around my face was gone. My silver hair looked intentional now instead of neglected. Softer, modern, alive. When I walked outside, the Arizona sunlight hit my face differently. It sounds ridiculous, doesn't it, a haircut? But sometimes, tiny changes crack open locked doors inside you. After that came the dress. Not the exact red dress from the department store, but something close. Simple, elegant. Bold enough that old Molly would have called it impractical. I bought it anyway. Then 3 days later, something even stranger happened. I walked into a Ferrari dealership. To this day, I still don't fully understand why I turned into that parking lot. Maybe it was Robert's old joke echoing in my head. Maybe it was anger. Maybe grief finally got tired of sitting quietly. The showroom gleamed like a museum. Red paint reflected against polished floors. Men in expensive watches wandered around pretending they weren't checking price tags. I almost turned around immediately. Then a young salesman approached me. Tall, curly dark hair. Maybe 30 years old. "Good afternoon," he said warmly. "I'm Javier. Let me know if you'd like to look around. No condescension, no amusement, no talking slowly like I might get confused. Just respect." I blinked in surprise. "I'm probably wasting your time," I admitted. He smiled easily. "Ma'am, people who waste my time usually wear Rolexes." I laughed so hard I startled myself. Javier spent nearly an hour walking me through different models. He explained engines, interiors, customization packages. And the strange thing was, I understood more than he expected. Robert and I used to watch car shows together on Sundays. He loved engines. I loved the design. At one point, Javier tilted his head. "You really like these cars. I always have. So why haven't you owned one?" The answer rose instantly in my throat. Because life happened. Because bills happened. Because motherhood happened. Because somewhere along the way, wanting things for myself started feeling selfish. But instead, I simply said, "Timing." Then I saw it. A red Ferrari convertible near the center of the showroom. Bright, unapologetic, impossible to ignore. I walked toward it slowly. My reflection curved across the glossy paint. And suddenly, I remembered being 21 years old, laughing beside a motorcycle. I remembered Robert promising me a sports car one day. I remembered the woman in the photograph, alive, fearless, still somewhere inside me. Javier stood beside me quietly. "You want to sit in it?" I hesitated only half a second. The leather smelled rich and new. My hands wrapped around the steering wheel, and something unexpected hit me so hard it nearly brought tears to my eyes. Possibility. Not youth, not vanity. Possibility. The terrifying realization that maybe my life wasn't finished yet. Javier smiled. "You look good in this car." And for the first time in years, I believed someone. 3 hours later, I signed the paperwork. When I drove the Ferrari out of the dealership, my hands trembled against the wheel. Part fear, part exhilaration, part guilt. Because a voice deep inside me still whispered the same thing women are taught their entire lives. "This is too much for you." But another voice had finally started speaking too. And that voice quietly replied, "Why not?" The first time I drove the Ferrari on the highway alone, I cried. Not graceful movie tears either. I mean ugly crying. Mascara running, steering wheel gripping, can't catch your breath crying. Because somewhere between Phoenix and Scottsdale, with the desert wind rushing through my silver hair, I suddenly realized I hadn't felt free in years. Not truly free. Not since before Robert died. Maybe not even before that. For decades, my entire identity had been tied to taking care of someone else. Robert, Claire, bills, schedules, expectations, survival. But inside that car, for the first time in a very long time, nobody needed anything from me. I could just exist. And apparently, that terrified people. Especially my daughter. 3 days after buying the Ferrari, Claire showed up at my house unannounced. I heard her heels clicking quickly up the driveway before she even knocked. When I opened the front door, she removed her sunglasses slowly. Oh my God, I already knew what she'd seen. The Ferrari sat in the driveway, glowing bright red under the Arizona sun like a flare gun. Claire stared at it, then at me, then back at the car. "Please tell me that's not yours." I crossed my arms lightly. "It's mine." "Mom." Her voice cracked so loudly the neighbor's dog started barking. "What?" I asked calmly. "What do you mean?" "What?" She pointed wildly toward the driveway. "Why would you buy something like that?" I almost laughed, not because it was funny. Because nobody asks a 70-year-old man why he buys a sports car. They just call him successful. I liked it, I said. Claire stared at me like I'd confessed to armed robbery. You liked it, she repeated slowly. Yes, you spent, $200,000 because you liked it, a little less than that. Molly. That caught my attention immediately. Claire only used my first name when she was angry enough to forget I was her mother. I leaned against the doorway. Why are you upset? Because this is insane. No, I said quietly. It's unexpected. That's different. Claire rubbed her forehead dramatically. Mom, people our age don't do this. Our age. You know what I mean? I did know what she meant. Women my age were supposed to buy orthopedic shoes and disappear politely into retirement communities. Not drive convertibles. Not wear red dresses. Not start becoming visible again. Claire walked around the Ferrari slowly. This is exactly the kind of thing people laugh about. I looked at her carefully. What people? She hesitated. My friends, clients, people online. There it was again. The audience Claire lived for. Everything in her life seemed designed for strangers watching from a distance. I suddenly wondered if she even knew who she was without their approval. Claire crossed her arms. Please tell me you're not planning to drive this to my birthday party. I smiled faintly. Would that embarrass you? Yes. At least she answered honestly. For a second, neither of us spoke. Then Claire sighed heavily. Mom, I'm trying to help you. No, I said softly. You're trying to manage me. That shut her up immediately. She opened her mouth, closed it, then looked away. I just don't want people judging you. I almost said something cruel. Instead, I asked quietly, or judging you. Her silence answered for her. Claire left 20 minutes later, still frustrated, still confused, still convinced this entire situation was some kind of emotional breakdown. But after she drove away, I stood in my driveway staring at the Ferrari and realized something important. The car wasn't really the issue. Control was. For years, Claire had built a version of me that fit neatly into her world. Safe, predictable, aging quietly in neutral-colored cardigans. Now, suddenly, I was becoming unpredictable. And unpredictable women make people uncomfortable, especially when they're older. A week later, I joined a high-performance driving class. Yes, that sentence still sounds ridiculous to me, too. The class took place at a private track outside Phoenix. Most of the participants were wealthy men in their 40s, trying to relive college fantasies. The moment I climbed out of my Ferrari, several people stared openly. One man wearing aviator sunglasses actually laughed. Did somebody bring their grandma? I smiled politely. Yes, I said, and she paid in full. A woman nearby snorted into her coffee. Her name was Denise, 63, divorced twice, former ER nurse. By lunchtime, we were friends. That class changed something inside me. Not because of the driving, because of the women I met. Denise introduced me to two other women around our age, Sharon and Evelyn. One had started a jewelry business at 61. The other took up backpacking after her husband left her for a yoga instructor half his age. None of them apologized for existing. It was shocking. Over sandwiches and iced tea, we talked about the strange invisibility that comes with aging as a woman. Men age into authority, Sharon said bitterly. Women age into decoration. Or irrelevance, Evelyn added. I thought about Claire immediately, about the way she flinched every time I stepped outside the role she assigned me. That afternoon, I drove faster than I ever had in my life. Not recklessly, confidently. And every time the Ferrari roared around a curve, I felt another piece of fear falling away. When I got home that evening, I found Claire sitting on my porch. The second she saw me climb out of the Ferrari wearing sunglasses and laughing at a text Denise had sent, her expression hardened. You were driving that thing all day? I was at a class. A class? Yes. For what I smiled. To learn. Claire stared at me like she didn't understand the concept. Then her phone rang. She glanced at the screen and immediately walked several feet away before answering. But she wasn't far enough. I know, she whispered sharply. I just need more time. Silence. No, Ethan doesn't know yet. More silence. I said, I'll handle it. My stomach tightened immediately. Claire turned and noticed me watching. She ended the call too quickly. What was that about? I asked. Nothing. Claire, it's work. But she wouldn't meet my eyes. That bothered me. A lot. For the rest of the evening, she acted distracted. Nervous. She kept checking her phone every few minutes. At one point, I walked into the kitchen unexpectedly and found her staring at the paperwork Howard had mailed me earlier that week. Bank documents. Investment statements. Claire looked up too quickly. Oh, she said. I was just moving these. I nodded slowly. You can ask me questions you know. She hesitated. Then came the careful voice. How much money did Dad actually leave you? There it was. Not concern, curiosity, maybe even calculation. I watched my daughter carefully. The expensive blouse, the perfect makeup, the nervous tapping nails. And suddenly, for the first time, I noticed what existed underneath all her polished confidence. Fear. Real fear. What's going on? I asked quietly. Claire looked away immediately. Nothing. But I knew she was lying, because I'd spent 40 years being her mother. And mothers always know when panic enters the room before the words do. Later that night, after Claire finally left, I stood alone in my kitchen replaying everything. The secretive phone call, the tension, the questions about money, and then for reasons I couldn't explain, I thought about Ethan. Claire's fiancé always seemed polished, charming, smooth in a way that felt rehearsed. Too rehearsed. I walked to the window and stared out at the Ferrari sitting in the driveway beneath the porch light. 3 months ago, my biggest concern was grocery coupons. Now, my daughter was lying to me. Strangers were treating me differently because of money, and some instinct deep inside me kept whispering the same unsettling thought. Something was wrong. Very wrong. I met Daniel Brooks again because of a car, which somehow felt exactly like the kind of thing Robert would have laughed about. It happened on a Thursday afternoon at a vintage car exhibition in Scottsdale. Denise had convinced me to go after our driving class ended early. You own a Ferrari now, she said dramatically over the phone. You're legally required to attend rich people nonsense. I almost didn't go. Crowds exhausted me lately, especially Scottsdale crowds. Too many polished smiles, too many people performing versions of themselves. But something inside me had started resisting the instinct to stay home. So I went. The exhibition took place at a luxury resort with rows of restored vintage cars lined beneath white tents. Men in linen shirts stood around discussing engines like surgeons discussing rare diseases. I wandered slowly between the cars, surprisingly enjoying myself. Then I saw the Mustang. Dark blue. 1967. Perfect condition. Robert would have loved it. I smiled sadly and leaned closer to admire the detailing when a familiar voice behind me said, Still staring at dangerous things, huh? Every muscle in my body froze. I turned slowly, and there he was, Daniel Brooks. Older, obviously. Gray at the temples now. Lines around his eyes. Broader shoulders than I remembered, but still unmistakably Daniel. My first real love. For a second, my brain genuinely forgot what year it was. Oh my God, I whispered. He smiled slowly. Hey, Molly. Nobody had said my name like that in decades. Not rushed, not distracted, not absent-mindedly from another room. He said it like he actually saw me. I stared at him in shock. What are you doing here? I could ask you the same thing. His eyes moved briefly toward the Ferrari badge on my jacket. Though apparently you've become cooler since college. I laughed before I could stop myself. A real laugh. Warm, easy, familiar. And suddenly, I was 22 again. Daniel and I dated for nearly 3 years in college. Back then, he was all confidence and bad ideas. He played guitar, badly drove too fast, and once convinced me to skip class for a spontaneous road trip to New Mexico. Robert used to joke that Daniel was the kind of man women survived before marrying dependable men instead. Maybe he wasn't wrong. Life pulled us apart after graduation. Daniel moved to California. I met Robert 6 months later. And that was that. Or so I thought. We spent the next hour walking through the exhibition together. It felt strangely natural. Dangerously natural. Daniel told me he owned several automotive dealerships now. Divorced, 2 grown sons, living mostly between Arizona and California. And you? He asked gently. I hesitated. What was I now? A widow? A mother? A woman rediscovering herself through expensive machinery and emotional confusion. I'm figuring things out, I admitted finally. Daniel studied me carefully. That sounds serious. It is. He nodded slowly, like he understood. And somehow, I think he did. At one point, we stopped beside an old red convertible. Daniel leaned casually against the car. You know, he said you look happier than I expected. That surprised me? What does that mean? He smiled faintly. It means the last time I saw you, you looked exhausted. The truth hit me immediately, because he was right. I had been exhausted for years. Not physically, spiritually, the exhaustion of always being needed, but rarely being noticed. I crossed my arms lightly. Well, I said, apparently I'm having a late-life identity crisis. Daniel grinned. Good. I blinked. Good, Molly. Most people stop living emotionally by 50. Then they spend 20 more years pretending they're alive. That sentence stayed with me, because deep down, I knew exactly what he meant. Before we left, Daniel asked if I wanted dinner sometime. Simple. Direct. No awkward games. I hesitated, only because panic hit me so unexpectedly. Dinner, at 67, with a man. The ridiculousness of my own reaction embarrassed me immediately. Men my age dated all the time without apologizing for it. But women were expected to quietly retire from desire. I'd like that, I heard myself say. Daniel smiled warmly. Good. Because I already made reservations. I laughed again. And for the first time in years, I drove home smiling. Of course, life only lets you enjoy happiness briefly before testing it. 3 nights later, Claire came over unexpectedly while I was getting ready for dinner with Daniel. The timing couldn't have been worse. I opened the front door, wearing a black dress and heels I hadn't touched in years. Claire froze. What are you wearing? I looked down at myself. A dress. I can see that. Her eyes narrowed instantly. Where are you going, dinner? With who? I hesitated half a second too long. And that was enough. Claire's entire face changed. Oh my God! What, you're dating someone? The way she said it made it sound medically concerning. I kept my voice calm. I'm having dinner with an old friend. A man, yes, Claire. A man. She stared at me like she no longer recognized me. This is because of the Ferrari, isn't it? I almost laughed. What does that even mean? You've been acting completely different lately. There it was again. Acting different. As if becoming visible counted as misbehavior. Claire stepped inside without being invited. Who is he? You don't know him. Mom, his name is Daniel. The second I said it, Claire frowned. Wait, Daniel Brooks. That surprised me. You know that name Dad mentioned him once? I blinked. What? Claire shrugged awkwardly. He called you to unfinished business. For a moment, I genuinely couldn't speak. Robert had said that. My chest tightened unexpectedly. Not from guilt, from grief. Because suddenly, I missed him terribly. Claire crossed her arms. How serious is this? It's dinner? Claire, at your age, there it was. Again, that sentence, that tone, at your age. Something inside me finally snapped. My age? I repeated quietly. Claire immediately looked uncomfortable. You know what I mean. No, I said sharply. Actually, I don't. Silence filled the room. Claire blinked at me in surprise because I almost never raised my voice. I stepped closer slowly. What exactly am I supposed to do at my age, Claire? That's not what I meant. No, tell me. She looked trapped now. I just think people are going to talk. People already talk. Mom, I spent 12 years grieving your father, I said, my voice trembling now. 12 years making myself smaller and quieter, so nobody would feel uncomfortable around my sadness. And now suddenly, I buy a car and go to dinner, and everybody acts like I've lost my mind. Claire looked away. That's not fair. No, I agreed softly. It's not. For a second, neither of us moved. Then Claire sighed heavily. I just don't want you embarrassing yourself. That hurt more than anything else she'd said. Because buried underneath all her concern was one terrible truth. My daughter genuinely believed older women became ridiculous the moment they wanted anything for themselves. I grabbed my purse slowly. I'm going to dinner. Claire looked frustrated. You're seriously leaving? Yes. With him? Yes. She shook her head in disbelief. This whole thing feels crazy. I walked toward the door, then paused beside her. You know what's really crazy? I said quietly. What, that somewhere along the way you stopped seeing me as a person? Claire looked stunned. And honestly, so was I, because it was the first completely honest thing I'd said to her in years. The strange thing about finally standing up for yourself is that people who benefited from your silence rarely take it well, especially family. After my argument with Claire, she barely spoke to me for almost a week. Not completely, just enough to punish me. Short texts, delayed replies, cold politeness. I recognized the strategy immediately because Claire had inherited it from me. In our family, nobody screamed when they were hurt. We withdrew love carefully instead. Meanwhile, Daniel kept appearing in my life like sunlight slipping through blinds. Easy, warm, unexpected. We started having dinner once a week, then coffee in between, then long phone calls that somehow lasted 2 hours without either of us noticing. And the most dangerous part, he listened. Not distracted listening either. Not waiting for his turn listening. Real listening. One night, we sat outside a small Italian restaurant in Phoenix while desert wind moved softly through the patio lights. Daniel leaned back in his chair, studying me. You still apologize before giving opinions, he said. I frowned. No, I don't. You just apologized to the waiter because your fork fell. I blinked. Oh? Daniel smiled sadly. Molly, who taught you that taking up space was rude? That question followed me home because I honestly didn't know. Maybe life taught me. Maybe motherhood did. Maybe aging as a woman in America slowly trains you to shrink until nobody feels threatened by your existence anymore. A few days later, Claire called unexpectedly. Her voice sounded unusually cheerful. Hey, Mom. Immediately suspicious. Hello. I was thinking maybe we could do lunch tomorrow. That surprised me enough to sit down. Sure. And maybe afterward we could look at some investment opportunities together. There it was. Subtle as a sledgehammer. I kept my tone neutral. What kind of investment opportunities? Oh, nothing major. She laughed too quickly. Ethan just knows some people developing luxury properties near Sedona. I closed my eyes briefly. There was something about Ethan that never sat right with me. Too smooth, too polished, too practiced. Even his compliments sounded focus group tested. You should bring Daniel sometime, Claire added casually. That caught my attention immediately. Why no reason? Ethan would probably enjoy meeting him. Something in her voice felt off. Careful, calculated. The next afternoon, Claire chose a rooftop restaurant overlooking downtown Scottsdale. Everything about the place screamed expensive performance. White furniture, tiny appetizers, women pretending not to compare handbags. Claire arrived 20 minutes late wearing oversized sunglasses and a cream-colored designer jumpsuit. She hugged me quickly. You look nice, she said. Not warm, evaluative. Still, I appreciated the effort. We ordered lunch, and for the first 15 minutes, Claire acted unusually attentive. She asked about my driving classes, about Daniel, about the Ferrari. At one point, she even laughed genuinely at one of my stories. I felt myself relaxing. Maybe things were getting better. Then Ethan arrived. Hope you ladies don't mind me crashing lunch, he said smoothly. Of course. He kissed Claire dramatically before shaking my hand. Molly, he said warmly, you're looking younger every time I see you. There it was, that rehearsed charm. I smiled politely anyway. Ethan slid into the seat beside Claire, perfectly tailored and painfully handsome in the kind of way magazines manufacture. For years, I probably would have been impressed by him. Now I mostly felt tired. Halfway through lunch, Ethan casually brought up investment properties. There's incredible money moving into luxury retirement communities right now, he explained. Huge opportunity. Claire nodded enthusiastically. I stayed quiet. Ethan continued smoothly. People your age are downsizing constantly. The market is exploding. People your age? Funny how men say that phrase without realizing how clinical it sounds. Claire reached for my hand. Mom, you've always been smart financially. We just thought maybe you'd want your money working for you. My money, not Dad's money, not your future. My money? The wording mattered. I looked carefully between them. Then I asked quietly, Are you too in financial trouble? The silence was immediate. Claire looked startled. Ethan recovered first. Of course not. Too fast. Claire picked up her water glass but didn't drink from it. I noticed her hands trembling slightly. That's when I knew. Something was wrong. Very wrong. The rest of lunch felt strangely tense after that. Ethan kept steering conversation back toward investments while pretending he wasn't. Claire laughed too loudly at everything he said. And underneath it all, I could feel pressure. Invisible pressure. Like two people desperately trying to keep plates spinning before they crashed. After lunch, Claire insisted on walking me to my car. The second Ethan disappeared back inside to take a call, her entire demeanor changed. The smile vanished instantly. Mom, she said quietly, please don't embarrass me with Ethan. I stared at her. What does that mean? She hesitated. He thinks you've been acting impulsive lately. I almost laughed. The man selling luxury investment schemes thinks I'm impulsive because I bought a car. Claire crossed her arms. You know what I mean. No, I said sharply. I really don't anymore. She sighed heavily. Mom, Ethan grew up around successful people. He understands appearances. There it was again. Appearances. Always appearances. I looked directly at my daughter. Claire, are you happy? That startled her. What with him? She looked away immediately, and that tiny movement told me more than words could have. I love him, she answered finally. But it sounded rehearsed. Not true. Just practiced. That night, I told Daniel everything over dinner. The investment conversation, Claire's nervous behavior, Ethan's constant pressure. Daniel listened quietly without interrupting. Then he asked one simple question. "What does Ethan do exactly?" I blinked. "He's in finance, I think." Daniel frowned. "You think, well, investments, consulting, something like that?" Daniel sat back slowly. "That's vague." I suddenly realized he was right. In all the months Claire had dated Ethan, I still couldn't clearly explain his actual job. That unsettled me immediately. Daniel studied me carefully. "Molly, I'm going to tell you something, and you're probably not going to like it." My stomach tightened. What I know Ethan Cole? Every nerve in my body went still. What Daniel's jaw hardened slightly. Not personally, but I've heard his name before. I stared at him. From where business circles. A cold feeling spread slowly through my chest. Daniel leaned forward. "There were rumors a few years ago. Real estate scams. Questionable investment groups. Older clients losing money." I felt suddenly nauseated. "No," I whispered instinctively. Daniel's expression softened immediately. I could be wrong. But he didn't sound wrong. That was the problem. I thought about Claire's trembling hands, the secretive phone calls, the pressure about investments, and suddenly, pieces started shifting into place in ways I didn't like at all. "You think he's using her?" I said quietly. Daniel didn't answer immediately, which was answer enough. "I think he said carefully, 'You should be very careful before giving that man access to your money.'" I stared down at my wine glass. For the first time since buying the Ferrari, real fear finally pushed through the excitement. Because this suddenly wasn't about embarrassment anymore, or aging, or Claire judging me. This was something darker, and deep down, I think part of me already knew. My daughter wasn't just pretending to be happy. She was drowning, and Ethan Cole might be the reason why. I didn't sleep at all the night Daniel told me about Ethan. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Claire at 12 years old, sitting cross-legged on the kitchen floor doing homework, while Robert burned pancakes behind her. She used to trust people so easily back then, especially charming people. And Ethan was nothing if not charming. By morning, my anxiety had hardened into something sharper. Instinct. The kind mothers develop after decades of sensing danger before anyone else notices it. I called Daniel before 8. I want to know everything I said the second he answered. He didn't ask questions. Meet me for coffee. An hour later, we sat in a quiet cafe in North Scottsdale, while Daniel slid his phone across the table toward me. "I made a few calls last night," he said carefully. On the screen was an article. The headline mentioned an investment group under investigation 3 years earlier. No criminal charges, no convictions, but several civil complaints, missing funds, retirement accounts wiped out, older investors manipulated into risky property deals. And there, halfway down the article, was Ethan's name. Not as the owner, not officially, but connected. My stomach dropped. Oh my God. Daniel kept his voice low. "Molly, I don't know how deep he was involved, but this isn't random." I stared at the screen. The smiling photo beside the article looked nothing like the polished man Claire brought to charity dinners. This version of Ethan looked colder somehow. Predatory. "He told Claire he worked in luxury acquisitions," I whispered. Daniel gave me a grim smile. That phrase can mean almost anything. I rubbed my temples slowly. "She's going to marry him." Daniel hesitated. Then quietly, "Maybe not." I looked up sharply. "What does that mean?" He leaned back carefully. I think Ethan's under pressure. My pulse quickened. What kind of pressure? The kind that makes men desperate. Something about the way he said it terrified me, because desperation changes people, especially people already comfortable with manipulation. Daniel reached across the table, gently touching my hand. Molly, you need to prepare yourself. For what? For the possibility that Claire already knows more than she's admitting. That hit me harder than anything else. No, I whispered instantly, but even as I said it, doubt crept in. The nervous phone calls, the sudden interest in my money, the forced smiles. Deep down, Claire had never been stupid, so how much had she ignored on purpose? I drove home feeling sick. The Ferrari suddenly felt less exciting now, less symbolic. It wasn't freedom anymore. It was a spotlight. And somehow, without meaning to, I had driven directly into the middle of something dangerous. Later that afternoon, Claire called. Her voice sounded overly cheerful again. Hey Mom, just checking in. Checking in? Translation monitoring? Hi. You okay? I'm fine. That's good. Silence stretched awkwardly between us. Then Claire cleared her throat. So, Ethan and I are making an announcement at the party. There it was. My chest tightened immediately. What kind of announcement? Another pause. Then, we're getting engaged. I closed my eyes. Of course they were. Suddenly, everything made terrible sense. The pressure, the investments, the urgency. Ethan needed stability fast. And Claire, God help her, probably believed marriage would fix whatever was collapsing underneath them. That's wonderful, I said automatically. But my voice sounded strange even to me. Claire noticed immediately. You don't sound excited? I gripped the kitchen counter harder. Claire. What I chose my next words carefully. Are you absolutely sure about him? Silence. Then irritation. Seriously, I'm asking because I love you. You're asking because Daniel got into your head. That startled me. What, you barely know him again, and suddenly you think you're some expert on my relationship. My stomach sank. Ethan had already gotten to her. Claire, listen to me. No, you listen to me. Her voice sharpened instantly. For months, you've been acting completely different. The car, the clothes, the dating, and now suddenly you're suspicious of Ethan because some man from your past says so. This isn't about Daniel. Then what is it about? I almost told her everything right there. The article, the complaints, the fear clawing at my chest. But something stopped me. Because if Claire was already emotionally trapped, directly attacking Ethan might only push her closer to him. So instead, I asked quietly, Are you happy? She exhaled sharply. Why does everybody keep asking me that? Everybody? Interesting. Meaning someone else had noticed too. I just want you safe. I'm not a child, Mom. No, I said softly. You're my child? There's a difference. For a second, I thought she might cry. Then the wall came back up immediately. You know what, she snapped. Maybe don't come to the party if you're going to make everything weird. That hurt more than I expected. Claire, I mean it. Silence. Then more quietly. Please don't embarrass me. The call ended before I could answer. I stood frozen in my kitchen, staring at my phone. Not embarrass me. That phrase again. As if my existence itself had become socially dangerous. That evening, Daniel came over. I hadn't invited him. He simply showed up with takeout and concern written across his face. You sounded shaken on the phone. I let him inside silently. We sat at the kitchen table eating Chinese food out of cartons while I told him about the engagement announcement. Daniel listened quietly. Then he sighed. This is moving too fast. I know. You need to tell her. I can't. Molly. She won't believe me. And we both knew I was right. Claire wasn't in a place where facts mattered anymore. Fear was driving her now. Fear of failure. Fear of humiliation. Fear of admitting she'd built her entire life around appearances that might collapse overnight. Daniel leaned back in his chair, watching me carefully. What are you going to do? I didn't answer immediately. Because the truth was, I didn't know. Part of me wanted to expose Ethan immediately. Another part wanted to protect Claire from public humiliation at all costs. Because no matter how cruel she'd become lately, she was still my daughter. Daniel's voice softened. You can't save people from lessons they refuse to learn. I stared down at my untouched food. I'm her mother, and you're still a person. That sentence hit something deep inside me. Because for so many years I believed motherhood required self-erasure. That loving your child meant destroying yourself willingly if necessary. But sitting there across from Daniel, exhausted and heartsick and terrified, I suddenly wondered something painful. What if Claire had spent years taking me for granted because I taught her that my needs always came last? Late that night after Daniel left, I walked into my bedroom and opened the closet. The red dress hung near the back, elegant, bold, alive. I ran my fingers slowly across the fabric. Then I looked toward the window where the Ferrari sat beneath the porch light. 3 months ago, I would have hidden from conflict, canceled plans, made excuses for Claire, stayed home quietly so nobody felt uncomfortable. But something had changed, not just externally, internally. I was done shrinking, done apologizing for existing loudly enough to be noticed. Claire wanted me invisible at that party because invisibility made her feel safe. But I wasn't invisible anymore. And for reasons I still couldn't fully explain, I suddenly knew exactly what I was going to do. I was going to show up, in the red dress, in the Ferrari. And this time, I wasn't going to make myself smaller for anyone. The night of Claire's birthday party, Scottsdale looked like a jewelry box. Everything glittered. The city lights, the rooftop pool, the women wrapped in designer silk pretending not to shiver in the desert wind. And somewhere above all of it, my daughter was trying desperately to hold her perfect life together with manicured hands. I almost didn't go. Right up until the last moment, I stood in my bedroom staring at the red dress, wondering if this was bravery or stupidity. Maybe both. My phone buzzed around 6:30. A text from Claire. Please don't make tonight about you. I stared at the message for a long time. Then I set the phone down without answering. Daniel arrived 20 minutes later. When I opened the front door, he stopped completely. For a second, he just looked at me. Then softly, "Wow." I laughed nervously. That bad. That dangerous. I rolled my eyes, but warmth spread through my chest anyway. The red dress fit perfectly. Elegant, clean lines. Nothing inappropriate, nothing desperate. But it was undeniably visible. And maybe that was the real issue. Women my age are allowed to exist. We're just not supposed to command attention. Daniel held out his arm. You ready, No? Absolutely not. Yes, I lied. The drive to Scottsdale felt surreal. The Ferrari purred beneath us while city lights stretched across the desert like scattered gold. Daniel drove because my hands were trembling too badly. You can still leave if you want, he said gently. I stared out the window. No. You sure she's my daughter? That answered everything. The rooftop venue sat atop a luxury hotel overlooking downtown Scottsdale. Valets in black uniforms moved expensive cars like chess pieces, while music drifted down from above. As we pulled toward the entrance, heads started turning immediately. The Ferrari had that effect. People noticed it before they even realized why. Daniel parked near the front entrance, and suddenly, I understood something uncomfortable about wealth. Attention follows it automatically. The valet hurried toward us. "Beautiful car," he breathed. Daniel smiled lightly. "You should see the owner." I swatted his arm. But I smiled. Then the elevator doors opened, and everything changed. The rooftop glowed beneath hanging lights and flickering candles. Waiters carried champagne through clusters of wealthy guests, laughing too loudly at each other's jokes. At the center of it all stood Claire. She looked stunning. Silver gown, hair swept elegantly back, diamond earrings catching the light every time she turned her head. For one painful second, I saw the little girl she used to be. Then someone near the entrance noticed me. Conversation slowed. One woman blinked openly. A man near the bar muttered, "Is that her mother?" Whispers spread quickly after that. Because there I was. The embarrassing older mother Claire spent months trying to soften into the background. Except now, I was stepping out of a Ferrari wearing red beside a distinguished older man nobody recognized. And suddenly, I wasn't background anymore. Claire turned toward the entrance, smiling automatically, then froze. The expression on her face almost broke my heart. Shock first, then horror, then humiliation. "Mom." Even across the rooftop I heard it. Not warm, not happy. A warning. I walked toward her slowly with Daniel beside me. Every eye in the place followed us. Claire recovered just quickly enough to force a tight smile. "You came. I told you I would." Her eyes darted immediately toward the Ferrari visible below through the rooftop glass panels. "Oh my God," she whispered. "You actually drove that here. You said it was a party." "Molly?" she hissed under her breath. "What are you doing?" I blinked calmly. "Celebrating your birthday." Claire looked seconds away from panicking. "You could have just come normally." There it was. Normally, meaning quietly, safely, invisible. Before I could answer, Ethan appeared beside her carrying 2 champagne glasses, and the second he saw Daniel, everything changed. I watched the color drain completely from his face. Not subtly either. 1 second smooth and confident, the next second pale as paper. Daniel noticed immediately. So did I. Ethan stopped walking. The champagne glasses trembled slightly in his hands. For the first time since meeting him, he looked genuinely afraid. Claire frowned. "Ethan," he didn't answer. His eyes stayed locked on Daniel. Daniel's expression hardened instantly. Not dramatic, controlled, which somehow felt worse. "Ethan Cole," Daniel said calmly. The rooftop suddenly felt quieter. Ethan swallowed hard. "Daniel Brooks." Claire looked between them in confusion. "You two know each other." Neither man answered immediately. That terrified me, because silence carries truth differently than words do. Finally, Ethan forced a smile. "Business circles," he said quickly. Daniel didn't smile back. Something like that. Every instinct inside me screamed now. Guests nearby pretended not to listen while very obviously listening. Claire laughed nervously. "Well, this is weird." "Yes," Daniel said softly. "It really is." Ethan set the champagne glasses down too quickly. "I need to make a call." Then he walked away almost immediately. Not casually. Escaping. Claire stared after him. What the hell was that? Daniel remained calm. "Your fiancé seems nervous." Claire crossed her arms instantly, about what Daniel looked directly at her. "That's probably a question you should ask him." The tension between them became almost physical. I touched Claire's arm gently. "Honey, no." She stepped away immediately. "What is happening?" Guests nearby pretended to resume conversations, but the energy across the rooftop had shifted completely. People sensed drama, and wealthy people love drama as long as it belongs to someone else. Claire lowered her voice sharply. "Mom, did you bring him here to embarrass me?" The accusation hurt, because despite everything, part of her still believed I was doing this for attention. "No," I said quietly. "I came because I love you." "Then why does it feel like you're trying to ruin tonight?" Before I could answer, Ethan returned, but now he looked composed again. Too composed, like a man who'd shoved panic into a locked box temporarily. He smiled tightly toward Daniel. "Didn't expect to see you here." Daniel folded his hands calmly. "Neither did I." Claire looked between them again. "Seriously, somebody explain what's going on?" Ethan answered first. "Old business disagreement. Nothing important." Daniel's eyes never left his. "That depends who lost money." The silence afterward was catastrophic. Claire blinked slowly. What Ethan laughed immediately. "Come on." Really, Daniel stayed calm. "You know exactly what I'm talking about." Guests nearby had fully stopped pretending not to listen now. I could feel the entire rooftop tightening around us. Claire stared at Ethan. What is he talking about? Ethan reached for her hand quickly. "Baby, don't do this here. Do this here." Interesting phrasing. Not there's nothing to explain. Not denial. Management. Control. Claire pulled her hand away slightly. "Ethan." For the first time all night, real fear flickered across her face. And suddenly, I realized something heartbreaking. Part of her already knew. Maybe not everything, but enough. Enough to recognize panic when she saw it. Ethan looked directly at me then. Not Claire. Me. And beneath his polished smile, I saw something cold finally surface. Resentment. Because I wasn't supposed to become a problem. I was supposed to stay small. Quiet. Manipulatable. Instead, I arrived in a red Ferrari beside the one man who recognized exactly who he was. And Ethan knew immediately. The game had changed. The rooftop no longer felt like a birthday party. It felt like the moment before a building collapses. Everyone could sense it. The music still played softly through hidden speakers. Champagne still sparkled beneath hanging lights. Waiters still moved politely through the crowd, pretending nothing unusual was happening. But human beings are animals when tension enters a room. We smell it instantly. Claire stood frozen between Ethan and Daniel, her face pale beneath expensive makeup. "What does he mean?" she asked again. Ethan forced out a laugh. "Claire, seriously, this is ridiculous." Daniel remained calm beside me. Too calm. That kind of calm only exists when someone knows the truth already. "I'm not interested in humiliating anyone," Daniel said evenly. "But your fiancé should probably explain why multiple investors lost money after trusting his recommendations." A murmur spread nearby. Small, sharp, dangerous. Claire looked at Ethan immediately. "Investors," Ethan's jaw tightened. "Molly," he said suddenly turning toward me, "I think your friend is misunderstanding some things." Friend. Interesting choice. Not Daniel. Not Mr. Brooks. Friend. A subtle attempt to reduce him. I folded my arms quietly. Then explain. Ethan's eyes flicked toward me briefly, and for the first time I saw genuine hostility underneath the charm. Not irritation. Hatred. Because men like Ethan only respect women they can control. And I had stopped being controllable. Claire stepped closer to him. Ethan. His expression softened instantly when he looked at her. Smooth again. Practiced. Baby, listen to me. A few years ago, I worked with a development group that had some financial issues. That's all this is. Daniel tilted his head slightly. That's one way to describe 3 lawsuits. Claire stared. What lawsuits? Ethan's face hardened again. None of which involved me directly. But your name was attached to the company, Daniel replied. Ethan looked ready to explode now. This is unbelievable. No denial again. That's what frightened me most. Every answer Ethan gave danced around the truth instead of killing it outright. Claire noticed too. I could see it happening in real time. The doubt, the panic, the tiny cracks spreading through the perfect image she'd built around him. Molly, Ethan said sharply, "Did you bring him here to attack me?" Before I could answer, Daniel spoke first. No, I came because I care about her. Ethan laughed coldly. Please, you barely know these people. Daniel's eyes darkened slightly. I know enough. The air between them felt electric now. Claire looked overwhelmed. Guests nearby openly stared. A woman near the bar subtly lifted her phone like she might start recording. That's when Ethan made his first real mistake. He lost control, not completely, just enough. He stepped closer to Daniel. You know nothing about my relationship. Daniel didn't move. I know men who target vulnerable people when they're desperate. Claire flinched visibly. Ethan noticed immediately, and suddenly his charm disappeared altogether. Excuse me, he snapped. There it is, Daniel said quietly. What the real you? Silence crashed across the rooftop. Claire looked terrified now. Stop, she whispered. Neither man listened. Ethan turned toward me again. This is exactly why older people shouldn't interfere in things they don't understand. The words hit harder than he intended, because suddenly everything became clear. Not just his manipulation, his contempt. Women my age weren't people to Ethan. We were opportunities, resources, invisible until useful. I stared directly at him. You were planning to ask Claire to convince me to invest with you tonight? Claire's head whipped toward him instantly. What? Ethan looked furious now. That's not true. It is true, I said calmly. That's why you've both been pressuring me about money for weeks. Claire stepped backward slowly like the floor beneath her had shifted. Ethan. He grabbed her hand quickly. Baby, don't do this. Again, not denial, management. Daniel exhaled slowly beside me. Then very calmly, he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out folded papers. My stomach dropped. What are those? Claire whispered. Ethan's face turned white instantly. Daniel handed the papers to Claire without speaking. She stared down at them. Civil complaints, business records, settlement documents. I watched her eyes move faster and faster across the pages, then stop. Her breathing changed immediately. No, she whispered. Ethan moved toward her. Claire, listen to me. You told me those accusations were fake. They are exaggerated. You said your name wasn't attached. His silence answered for him. Claire looked up slowly, and I swear I watched her heart break in real time. Not because of the money, because of humiliation. Claire built her entire life around appearing successful and admired. Now the man she planned to marry was unraveling publicly in front of the exact social circle she spent years trying to impress. And the cruelest part I knew that mattered deeply to her. A woman suddenly appeared near the edge of the crowd. Mid-60s, elegant black dress, trembling hands. She stared directly at Ethan. Oh my God, she whispered. Ethan froze. The woman's face twisted with recognition and fury. You! Every instinct in my body tightened. Claire looked between them in confusion. Who is that? The woman ignored her completely. 3 quick steps forward. That man stole $200,000 from me. The rooftop exploded into noise. What? Oh my God! Are you serious? Ethan immediately raised both hands. This is insane. The woman's voice cracked violently. My husband died 6 months before that investment collapsed. She pointed directly at him. You told me my money was safe. Claire stumbled backward like she'd been physically hit. No, she whispered again. Ethan's composure shattered completely now. You signed every document voluntarily. The second the words left his mouth, he realized the mistake. The woman stared at him in disbelief. So now it's my fault. Daniel stepped slightly in front of me instinctively. Protective. Quietly protective. The woman's eyes filled with tears. I trusted you. Ethan looked trapped now. Cornered animals always become dangerous. I didn't force anyone to invest, he snapped. Claire stared at him like she no longer recognized his face. You lied to me? No. Yes, she said louder now. You lied about everything. Guests openly whispered all around us. Phones out now, people recording. The perfect party Claire spent months creating had transformed into public destruction. And standing there watching my daughter unravel, I felt something awful. Not satisfaction, grief. Because despite everything, I never wanted to humiliate her. I only wanted to protect her. Claire looked at me then, and suddenly I saw it. Not anger, not embarrassment, fear. Real fear. The kind that strips all performance away. Mom, she whispered suddenly. Not Molly. Mom! Her voice cracked on the word. And just like that, I knew. No matter how old your child becomes, the moment they're truly scared, they still reach for you first. Ethan looked around wildly, now realizing the room had turned against him. Then his eyes landed on Claire, and for one terrifying second, I saw calculation return. Cold, fast, dangerous. He stepped toward her carefully. Baby, we can fix this. Claire recoiled instantly, and that's when I realized the truth. The party was over, but the real disaster. It was only beginning. The ride home from the party was silent. Not peaceful silence. Devastated silence. The kind that fills every inch of space until breathing feels loud. Claire sat in the back seat of the Ferrari staring out the window while Daniel drove. Her mascara had smudged beneath her eyes, and her silver gown looked wrinkled now, like the illusion of perfection had physically collapsed around her. She hadn't spoken once since we left the rooftop. Not after Ethan disappeared. Not after guests started whispering openly. Not after one woman posted a video online before we even reached the elevator. I knew because Claire's phone kept vibrating nonstop beside her. Messages, calls, notifications. Her carefully curated world was detonating in real time. Daniel finally pulled into my driveway just after midnight. Nobody moved. Then quietly Claire spoke. I can't go home. Her voice barely sounded like hers. I turned slowly. What? She swallowed hard. The condo. Ethan has keys. Fear crawled slowly through my chest. Not social embarrassment anymore. Actual fear. Daniel looked at me through the rearview mirror. I'll check it. No, Claire whispered immediately. Please. That one word told me everything. She was terrified of seeing him. Daniel nodded once. I'll go alone. After he left Claire, and I stood awkwardly inside my kitchen under soft, yellow lights. For years, I imagined what it might feel like to finally confront my daughter honestly. I thought maybe it would feel satisfying. victorious. It didn't. It felt heartbreaking. Claire wrapped her arms around herself tightly. I look ridiculous. No. Yes. Her voice cracked. Everybody saw. There it was. Even now, humiliation came before betrayal. Not because Claire was shallow. Because shame had ruled her life for so long that it became her first language emotionally. I poured her a glass of water. She didn't drink it. Finally, quietly I asked, "How long have you known something was wrong?" Claire stared at the countertop. A while. The honesty shocked me. How long? She laughed bitterly. I don't even know anymore. Then suddenly the words started pouring out, like she'd been holding them underwater for months. At first, it was small things she whispered. Weird calls, investors angry about delays, money moving around constantly. I sat down slowly. Claire's eyes filled immediately, but every time I asked questions, Ethan had an answer. Claire and I wanted to believe him. Her voice broke completely on the last sentence, because that was the real tragedy, not stupidity. Hope. Hope makes intelligent people ignore impossible things. Claire wiped her face angrily. You know what the worst part is? I stayed quiet. I think deep down, I always knew. Silence. Then. But I kept thinking, if I could just hold everything together long enough, maybe things would work out. Her phone buzzed again. This time, she looked at it, then went completely pale. I recognized fear instantly now. What is it? Claire slowly handed me the phone. My stomach dropped. Bank alert payment default notice. Another notification appeared immediately afterward. Urgent account review required, then another, and another. My chest tightened. What is this? Claire started crying silently, not graceful tears. Shaking tears. He used my name. The room went still. What he said, it was temporary. Her breathing became uneven now. Business transfers, bridge financing. He said once the Sedona deal closed, everything would balance out. How much Claire looked at me with pure terror. I don't know anymore. That frightened me more than any number could have, because it meant the damage was already beyond her control. At 2 a.m, Daniel returned. The second he walked inside, I knew something was wrong. The condo's empty, he said quietly. Claire closed her eyes immediately. He took everything important. What does that mean? I asked. Daniel hesitated. Computers? Files? Hard drives? Claire looked physically sick now. He's running. Nobody said anything after that, because we all knew it was true. The next 3 days became a blur of lawyers' phone calls, frozen accounts, and panic. Claire moved into my guest room because she was terrified to stay alone. And for the first time in years, I saw my daughter without the performance. No designer image. No curated confidence. Just exhaustion. Real exhaustion. One afternoon, I found her sitting at my kitchen table wearing one of my old sweatshirts, staring blankly at paperwork. She looked 10 years younger and infinitely sadder. I ruined my life, she whispered. I sat across from her quietly. No? Yes, I did. You trusted the wrong person. I became the wrong person. That sentence hit me hard. Claire looked up slowly. You know what's awful? She asked. I waited. I spent so many years terrified people would think you were embarrassing. Her voice cracked. And I ended up humiliating myself anyway. I looked down at my hands. Wrinkled now. Softened by time. Hands that had held her through fevers and nightmares and heartbreaks. I never cared about the Ferrari, Claire whispered suddenly. I blinked. What I mean? I did, but not really. Tears slid down her cheeks again. I was scared. There it was. Finally. The truth underneath everything. scared of what Claire laughed weakly through tears, becoming invisible. The room felt suddenly very quiet. She wiped her eyes angrily. I know that sounds horrible. No, I said softly. It sounds honest. Claire stared at me. You lost Dad, and somehow you just disappeared into this quiet little life, and I think part of me became terrified that getting older meant becoming irrelevant. My chest tightened painfully. I thought if I stayed successful enough, she whispered, pretty enough, impressive enough, maybe it wouldn't happen to me. That hurt worse than any insult she'd ever thrown at me, because suddenly I understood. Claire didn't hate aging women. She feared becoming one, and every time she looked at me, she saw what society teaches women to fear most: being overlooked, forgotten, replaceable. I'm sorry, she whispered. Simple words, but devastating. I looked at my daughter carefully, the little girl who used to crawl into my lap during thunderstorms. The woman who spent years trying to outrun age failure, loneliness, and shame all at once. And suddenly, my anger became something sadder. Compassion, not excuse, not forgiveness yet, but understanding. Still pain lingered too. Because understanding someone doesn't erase what they broke inside you. You hurt me, I said quietly. Claire nodded immediately. I know. For years. More tears. I know. You made me feel like my life was over just because I got older. Claire covered her face with both hands. I know. Silence stretched between us. Then finally, quietly, I thought if you disappeared gracefully enough, maybe aging wouldn't scare me so much. That sentence nearly shattered me, because mothers always know when their daughters are lying. But this was the first time in years I believed Claire was telling me the truth. And somehow, that hurt even more. Later that night, after Claire went to bed, I sat alone on the back patio, staring at the desert sky. Daniel stepped outside, carrying 2 cups of tea. He handed me one silently before sitting beside me. For a while, neither of us spoke. Then quietly, he asked, "How are you holding up?" I stared into the darkness. "I don't know. That's fair." I exhaled slowly. I spent so much time angry at her. Daniel nodded, and now I thought about Claire crying at my kitchen table, about the fear beneath all her cruelty, about how desperately women are taught to fear becoming older versions of themselves. And softly, I answered, "Now, I think she was drowning long before Ethan showed up." The strangest part about crisis is how quickly it strips life down to what's real. 3 weeks after the party, Claire no longer cared about luxury brunches or designer handbags or rooftop guest lists. She cared about things like legal paperwork, frozen accounts, debt notices, and whether Ethan would come back angry. Fear changes priorities fast. By then, she had officially moved into my guest room, not temporarily anymore, officially. The condo in Scottsdale was going on the market because Claire could no longer afford the mortgage payments attached to Ethan's financial mess. The first morning the realtor came to photograph the condo, Claire sat at my kitchen table staring into coffee she never drank. "I can't believe I'm losing everything," she whispered. I looked at her carefully. "You're not losing everything." She laughed weakly. "It feels like it, and honestly, I understood. Because when your identity gets built around appearances, losing appearances feels like losing yourself." That morning, Daniel drove Claire to meet a lawyer specializing in financial fraud cases. I offered to go too. Claire surprised me by shaking her head. "No," she said quietly. "I think I need to start handling some things myself." That mattered more than she realized. For the first time in years, she wasn't trying to perform competence. She was trying to become competent. There's a difference. After she left, I wandered through the quiet house carrying laundry I didn't really need to fold. I kept thinking about motherhood, about how strange it is watching your children become adults, and then realizing adulthood doesn't protect them from pain nearly as much as you hoped. At some point, Daniel stepped into the kitchen carrying groceries. "You alphabetized your spices while overthinking again, didn't you?" he asked casually. I blinked. How did you know that he opened the cabinet? The spices sat in perfect order. Daniel laughed softly. "Molly, your anxiety has organizational skills." I rolled my eyes despite myself. Then unexpectedly, I started crying. Not dramatic sobbing. Just exhausted tears slipping out before I could stop them. Daniel immediately set the grocery bags down. "Hey." "I failed her," I whispered. He looked genuinely confused. "What?" "I spent her whole life teaching her to care what people thought." "No, you didn't." "Yes, I did." My voice cracked. I taught her to survive by pleasing everyone around her, to look polished, to keep things together no matter what. Daniel stepped closer carefully. "That's not failure. That's what women are taught." I wiped my face angrily. "Well, it destroyed her." "No," he said softly. "Fear destroyed her. That stayed with me because he was right. Claire wasn't evil. She was terrified. Terrified of becoming ordinary. Terrified of becoming invisible. Terrified of aging in a world that treats older women like expired milk. And honestly, part of me understood that fear intimately. That afternoon, Claire returned from the lawyer's office looking completely drained. She dropped a thick folder onto the kitchen counter. "It's worse than we thought." My stomach tightened immediately. How bad? Claire sat down slowly. "There are loans under my name I didn't fully understand." Her voice sounded numb now. "Business guarantees, investment liabilities." Daniel frowned. "Did you sign them?" Claire closed her eyes. "Yes, but Ethan handled everything." She nodded weakly. "I trusted him." No one said anything for a moment. Then Claire whispered the sentence that broke my heart. "I feel so stupid." I moved beside her immediately. "No." "Yes." Tears filled her eyes again. How did I not see this? Because love mixed with fear creates blindness. Because manipulation rarely looks dangerous in the beginning. Because people like Ethan study vulnerabilities before they exploit them. But mostly because lonely people are easier to deceive. That part hurt the most. Over the next few weeks, life became painfully simple. Claire sold designer bags online, canceled luxury memberships, returned clothes with tags still attached. And every time another piece of her carefully constructed image disappeared, she looked simultaneously embarrassed and relieved. One night, we sat together folding laundry, while an old sitcom played quietly in the background. Claire held up one of my faded cotton sleep shirts and laughed softly. "You know what's weird? What you always looked more comfortable than me." I smiled faintly. "That's because elastic waistbands are freedom." She laughed for real then. A genuine laugh, not performative, not curated. And suddenly, I realized I hadn't heard that sound from her in years. Claire looked down at the laundry thoughtfully. I don't think I even knew who I was anymore. I stayed quiet. She continued softly. "Every year after 30 felt like a countdown." She shook her head. Everything became about staying desirable, successful, relevant. Her voice cracked slightly. "And then one day, I looked at you and got scared." That honesty still startled me sometimes. "Why?" "Because you seemed resigned." I absorbed that quietly, because she wasn't entirely wrong. For years after Robert died, I had disappeared emotionally. Not intentionally, just gradually. Grief makes your world smaller, one silent day at a time. Claire twisted the shirt in her hands. I thought if I became successful enough, maybe aging wouldn't happen to me. I smiled sadly. Oh, honey, I know how insane that sounds now. No, I said gently. It sounds human. She looked at me carefully then. You really forgive me? That question sat heavily between us. Because forgiveness isn't instant, not real forgiveness. Real forgiveness is slow, complicated, sometimes painful. I thought about the brunch, the comments, the humiliation, the years of feeling edited down into something more socially acceptable. Then I thought about Claire crying alone in my guest room after midnight because she thought her entire life was ruined. I'm trying, I admitted honestly. Tears filled her eyes again. That's fair. And somehow that answer healed something between us, because for once, neither of us was pretending. A few days later, Daniel invited me to a charity event supporting women rebuilding their lives after financial abuse and late-life divorce. At first, I said no automatically. Then I caught myself. Old habits. Shrinking habits. So I went. The room was filled with women in their 50s, 60s, even 70s, talking openly about starting over. One woman became a nurse at 62. Another left a 40-year marriage at 68. Another started traveling alone after her children moved away. Nobody apologized for still wanting joy. That struck me deeply. During the drive home, Daniel glanced at me. You're quiet. I'm thinking. Dangerous. I smiled faintly, then looked out the window at the desert sunset melting gold across the horizon. You know what's strange? What I spent years thinking getting older meant life slowly ending. Daniel nodded. A lot of people do. But now? I hesitated. Now what? I looked down at my hands, resting calmly in my lap. Now I think maybe life was waiting for me to finally arrive. Daniel reached over quietly, taking my hand. And for the first time in longer than I could remember, I didn't feel invisible. Not because of the Ferrari. Not because of money. Not because someone found me attractive again. But because I had finally stopped abandoning myself. The invitation arrived on a Tuesday morning. I almost threw it away by accident. At first glance, it looked like another charity fundraiser brochure Claire used to leave scattered around her condo when she was pretending networking counted as community service. But this envelope had my name handwritten across the front. Not Mrs. Reyes. Molly. Inside was an invitation to speak at a women's empowerment luncheon in Phoenix. Apparently, one of the women from the financial abuse charity event had shared my story with the organizers. Daniel found me rereading the invitation for the fourth time. You're thinking about saying no? He guessed immediately. I don't speak publicly. You literally spent 40 years raising a daughter. You survived marriage grief, betrayal, financial chaos, and Scottsdale brunch culture. I think you can handle a microphone. I laughed despite myself. Still fear sat heavily in my stomach. Public speaking felt impossible. Not because I was shy. Because visibility still scared me a little. Even now. Especially now. What would I even say? I asked quietly. Daniel looked at me carefully. The truth. Simple answer. Terrifying answer. Claire surprised me by encouraging it immediately. You should do it, she said one evening while helping me cook dinner. I glanced at her skeptically. You really think so? Yes. She hesitated before adding softly. People need to hear what happened to you. That sentence caught me off guard. Not what happened to us. To you. For the first time in years, Claire was beginning to separate my identity from motherhood. And strangely enough, that healed something inside me. The luncheon took place at a hotel ballroom in downtown Phoenix. Nothing overly glamorous. Round tables, white flowers, women of every age dressed in everything from business suits to jeans. As I stood backstage, gripping my speech notes, I suddenly felt ridiculous. What exactly qualified me to inspire anyone I bought a sports car and accidentally exposed a con artist? Not exactly Gandhi. I can still fake a medical emergency if you want, Daniel whispered beside me. I laughed nervously. You'd commit a felony for me without hesitation. That helped more than he realized. The event organizer touched my shoulder gently. You're up next. Suddenly, my mouth went dry. I walked toward the stage lights, feeling every single one of my 67 years. And for one terrifying second, all I wanted was to turn around. Then I spotted Claire sitting near the front table. No designer gown, no performance. Just my daughter looking at me with something I hadn't seen in a very long time. Respect. So I began. My name is Molly Reyes, I said into the microphone. And 6 months ago, my daughter told me to act my age. Soft laughter moved through the ballroom. I smiled faintly. At the time, it hurt me more than I admitted. Because the truth is, I already believed getting older meant becoming less visible. The room grew quiet, and suddenly the words started flowing naturally. I talked about Robert, about grief, about shrinking myself slowly after becoming a widow, about how women are praised their entire lives for sacrifice until one day they wake up and realize they've disappeared inside it. Nobody looked bored. Nobody checked their phones. Women listened with the kind of stillness that comes from recognition. At one point, I glanced down at my speech notes, then set them aside entirely, because I didn't want polished words anymore. I wanted honest ones. I spent years thinking aging gracefully meant asking for less, I admitted. Less attention, less joy, less space. A woman near the front nodded slowly with tears already in her eyes. And then one day I realized something heartbreaking. I continued. My daughter wasn't ashamed of me because I was old. I paused. She was terrified of becoming me. Silence. Heavy silence. The emotional kind. I told them about Claire's fear. About Ethan. About the pressure women feel to remain desirable forever in a society terrified of aging women. And then I said the thing that had taken me 67 years to finally understand. There is nothing shameful about still wanting a life at our age. The room erupted into applause. Not polite applause, emotional applause. The kind that comes from relief. Afterward, dozens of women approached me. One woman hugged me crying because her daughter stopped inviting her to social events after she turned 60. Another admitted she'd stayed in a miserable marriage because she thought nobody would want her afterward. Another whispered, I thought I was the only one who felt invisible. That one nearly broke me, because invisibility is the secret grief nobody warns women about. The event organizer posted clips of my speech online later that afternoon. By evening, the video had thousands of shares. By the next morning, it had hundreds of thousands. Claire walked into the kitchen holding her phone in complete disbelief. Mom! I looked up from my coffee. What, you're viral? I laughed immediately. No, I'm not. She turned the phone toward me. There I was, on screen in the red dress speaking beneath ballroom lights. Comments flooded underneath the video. Thank you for saying this. I'm 72 and I needed to hear this today. Why are women expected to disappear after 50? Your daughter is lucky to have you. I stared at the screen, speechless. For years, I thought my story was too small to matter. Turns out thousands of women were quietly carrying the same pain. Claire sat down across from me slowly. "I owe you an apology," she said quietly. I smiled faintly. "You've already apologized?" "No. Not completely." She looked down at her hands. "I spent so many years trying to become the kind of woman people admired." Her voice trembled slightly. "That I forgot how to admire kindness." That hit me hard. Because Claire had spent her whole adult life chasing approval from strangers while overlooking the people who actually loved her, including herself. "I used to hate when people noticed you," she admitted softly. "Now I realize it was because I was scared they'd stop noticing me." I reached across the table, taking her hand gently. "You don't have to earn your worth by performing all the time." Tears filled her eyes instantly. "I know that now." And for the first time in years, I believed her. Later that night, Daniel and I sat outside on the back patio, watching the desert sky fade into deep blue. My phone kept buzzing with interview requests and speaking invitations I still couldn't fully process. Daniel smiled over his wine glass. "You realize you accidentally became inspirational?" I groaned. "That sounds exhausting. You're handling it beautifully." I looked out toward the driveway where the Ferrari sat beneath soft porch lights. Months ago, that car represented rebellion. Now it represented something else entirely. Permission. Permission to exist fully, to want things, to take up space, to remain alive emotionally no matter what age the world assigned me. "I wasted a lot of years," I admitted quietly. Daniel shook his head immediately. "No." I looked at him. "You survived them. There's a difference." And somehow hearing that felt like forgiveness. Not from him, from myself. 3 months after Claire's birthday party imploded, life looked completely different. Quieter. Smaller in some ways. More honest in others. Claire had rented a modest townhouse in Phoenix after selling the Scottsdale condo. No rooftop pool. No luxury concierge. No marble countertops imported from Italy. Just sunlight, second-hand furniture, and peace. And strangely enough, she seemed lighter there. Not happy all the time, but real. The frantic energy she used to carry everywhere had faded. She no longer checked social media every 6 minutes or talked about networking like it was oxygen. Sometimes healing doesn't look glamorous. Sometimes it looks like eating takeout in sweatpants without apologizing for it. Daniel and I had settled into something gentle by then. Not dramatic romance. Not teenage obsession. Just companionship built carefully and honestly. He started leaving a toothbrush at my house. I started pretending not to notice. One Sunday morning, he showed up holding 2 coffees and a folded road map. An actual paper map. I laughed immediately. "Are we fleeing the country tempting?" he admitted. But no. He spread the map across my kitchen table dramatically. California coastline, Highway 1, ocean towns circled in blue ink. I stared at it. "What's this A road trip?" I blinked slowly. Daniel grinned. "You own a Ferrari, Molly. Legally, you're required to drive it irresponsibly along the Pacific coast at least once." I laughed so hard coffee nearly came out my nose. Then slowly, my smile faded. Because underneath the joke, I felt panic rising immediately. Road trip, weeks away, freedom, possibility. All the things I'd spent years convincing myself I no longer needed. Daniel noticed my hesitation instantly. "You hate the idea." "No," I said too quickly. "You do?" "I don't hate it." He leaned against the counter, studying me carefully. "You're scared." That annoyed me because he was right. "I'm 67, I muttered. Daniel blinked. and I can't just disappear across California like some retired teenager? Why not? The simplicity of the question irritated me even more, because I didn't actually have an answer. I just had decades of conditioning disguised as responsibility. Daniel folded the map calmly. Molly, when exactly were you planning to start living for yourself? That question stayed with me the entire day. Unfortunately, so did guilt, because part of me still felt selfish every time happiness appeared, especially after becoming a mother. That evening, Claire came over carrying grocery bags and accidentally found the map still sitting on the kitchen table. Her eyes widened immediately. "What's this?" I hesitated. Daniel answered cheerfully from the living room. "I'm kidnapping your mother." Claire laughed softly. Then she looked at me. "You're going?" The fear in my chest returned instantly. "I don't know." "Why not?" I blinked in surprise. "You think I should?" Claire looked genuinely confused. "Of course I do." That caught me completely off guard. 3 months earlier, she practically hyperventilated over me driving a Ferrari to a party. Now, suddenly, she wanted me driving down the California coast with my boyfriend like a retired movie character. I hesitated. It feels irresponsible. Claire stared at me for a long moment. Then slowly, "Mom, do you know how many years you gave away, taking care of everyone else?" The room went quiet. She set the groceries down carefully. "You spent your whole life making yourself smaller for other people." Her voice softened. "Please don't start doing it again now that you finally stopped." That nearly made me cry. Because somewhere along the way, my daughter had finally started seeing me clearly. Not as an extension of herself, not as an aging symbol of fear, as a woman. Claire smiled faintly. "Besides," she added, "you already went viral once. You might as well become one of those inspirational older women who drive convertibles near cliffs." I burst out laughing. "You're making fun of me." "A little." But her smile looked warm now. Not embarrassed. Proud. A few nights later, Claire invited me to dinner at her townhouse. Nothing fancy. Pasta, garlic bread, cheap wine, the kind of meal we used to eat before she became obsessed with appearing impressive. At one point, she disappeared into the bedroom briefly, then returned holding a small velvet box. My stomach tightened immediately. "What's that?" Claire sat down quietly across from me. "I found these while packing." She slid the box toward me. Inside sat the silver earrings Robert gave me on our 30th anniversary. The same earrings I wore to that awful brunch months ago. For a second, neither of us spoke. Then Claire looked at me with tears already forming. "I used to think these looked old-fashioned," she whispered. My chest tightened painfully. "And now," she smiled sadly, "now I think they look like someone who was loved very much." That completely broke me. I started crying instantly. So did she. And suddenly, we were both laughing through tears like idiots at her tiny kitchen table, while garlic bread burned slightly in the oven. "I'm sorry," Claire whispered again. Not dramatic this time. Quiet. Real. "I know," I whispered back. And finally, I meant it. Not because the hurt disappeared, but because I understood it now. Claire spent years terrified of becoming invisible because she watched me disappear after losing Robert. And I spent years disappearing because I thought sacrifice was the same thing as love. We both inherited broken ideas about womanhood. We just expressed them differently. A week later, Daniel and I packed the Ferrari. 2 overnight bags. Road snacks. Sunscreen neither of us would remember to use properly. Claire insisted on helping even though she mocked Daniel's paper maps the entire time. "This is what phones are for," she argued. Daniel looked offended. "Maps have character. They have folds." The morning we left, Claire hugged me tightly beside the driveway. Longer than usual. "You sure you'll be okay?" I asked softly. She smiled. "I think I finally will." Then her expression changed slightly, more emotional. "Mom." "Yes. I don't want you to act your age anymore." I laughed softly through sudden tears. "What does that mean now?" Claire looked toward the Ferrari gleaming beneath the morning sun. Then back at me. "I think maybe it means you finally get to live like yourself." That sentence stayed with me as Daniel pulled onto the highway. The desert stretched endlessly ahead. The top was down. Warm wind rushed through my silver hair. And somewhere between Phoenix and the California border, I realized something extraordinary. For the first time in my entire adult life, I wasn't driving toward obligation. I was driving toward joy. There's something healing about the Pacific Ocean. Maybe it's the sound. Maybe it's the endlessness of it. Or maybe it's because standing beside something so vast reminds you how small your fears actually are. Daniel and I spent 12 days driving along the California coast in the red Ferrari. 12 days of ocean air and roadside diners and little bookstores hidden in beach towns. 12 days of waking up without dread sitting on my chest. At 67 years old, that felt miraculous. Some mornings we drove with the top down while old rock songs played through the speakers and sunlight spilled across the highway like melted gold. Other days, we parked beside cliffs just to sit quietly watching waves crash against the rocks below. No performance, no pressure, no pretending. Just life. Real life. One afternoon, near Carmel by the sea, Daniel and I stopped at a tiny cafe overlooking the water. A young waitress brought us coffee and smiled brightly. "You two are adorable," she said casually. I nearly choked on my drink. After she walked away, Daniel looked smug. "You hear that? Oh, please. Adorable, Molly. We're 70. Exactly. We survived long enough to become adorable." I laughed so hard people turned around to stare. And the strange thing was, I didn't care. That realization hit me suddenly and deeply. For most of my adult life, I cared constantly. About expectations, about appearances, about being needed, about being appropriate. Even after buying the Ferrari, part of me still feared judgment. But somewhere between Arizona and California, I finally stopped apologizing for taking up space in my own life. One evening, we parked near Big Sur just before sunset. The ocean stretched endlessly below us, while cold wind tugged gently at my hair. Daniel leaned against the Ferrari beside me. "You're different now," he said quietly. I smiled faintly. "I hope so." "No," he corrected softly. "I mean lighter." I looked out toward the horizon. I think I spent years grieving a version of myself I thought was gone forever. And now, I thought carefully before answering. Now I think she was just waiting for me to come back. Daniel reached for my hand. No dramatic speeches, no grand declarations. Just warmth. Steady and real. That night in the hotel room, I stood in front of the mirror, removing my earrings slowly. Silver hair, wrinkles near my eyes, softness where youth used to live. And for the first time in my life, I looked at myself without criticism. Not because I suddenly looked young again, but because I finally understood aging wasn't evidence of failure. It was evidence of survival. When Claire and I video called the next morning, she answered wearing paint-stained sweatpants and no makeup. 6 months earlier, she would have died before appearing on camera like that. Now she just smiled tiredly. Hey yourself." Behind her, I noticed unpacked boxes and half-painted walls. "How's the townhouse still ugly?" she admitted. "But now it's ugly in an honest way." I laughed. That sounded more like my daughter than anything she'd said in years. She tilted her phone suddenly. Look, a small herb garden sat outside her kitchen window. Tiny basil plants, rosemary, mint. You hate gardening, I reminded her. I know. She smiled sheepishly. Turns out I only hated hobbies that couldn't be photographed for social media. I burst out laughing, then Claire's expression softened. You look happy. The sincerity in her voice nearly made me emotional. I am. She nodded slowly. I'm starting to understand something. What Claire hesitated. Success isn't supposed to feel like panic all the time. That sentence settled deeply inside me. Because for years she confused anxiety with ambition, performance with worth, exhaustion with achievement. And honestly, a lot of women do. I'm proud of you, I told her softly. Claire blinked in surprise. For what? For rebuilding honestly? Tears filled her eyes immediately. Some days, I still feel ashamed. I know. What if people never forget what happened? I thought about that carefully, then answered truthfully. Maybe they won't. She looked down. But eventually I continued gently. You stop building your life around strangers watching. Silence. Then slowly, Claire smiled. I think I'm finally learning that. After the call ended, I sat quietly for a long time, watching the ocean through the hotel balcony doors. And suddenly, I thought about Robert. Not with crushing grief this time, with gratitude, because loving him shaped my life. But losing him taught me something too. Love cannot become the funeral of your identity. For years after Robert died, I thought devotion meant disappearing into memory beside him. Now, I understood something different. The greatest way to honor a life fully loved is to continue living fully afterward. Later that afternoon, Daniel and I drove north along the coastline, while fog rolled softly across the cliffs. At one point, he glanced over at me smiling. What you know, your daughter was right. I narrowed my eyes suspiciously. Careful. She told you to act your age. I groaned. Oh no. Daniel laughed. But maybe acting your age finally means understanding you don't need permission anymore. That sentence stayed with me. Because he was right. At 20, you chase approval. At 40, you chase stability. At 67, maybe freedom finally matters more than either. As the sun lowered across the Pacific, I rested my hand against the door of the Ferrari and closed my eyes briefly. Months earlier, that car represented rebellion, then survival, then visibility. Now it meant something simpler. Joy. Pure, uncomplicated joy. And suddenly, I thought back to the rooftop party, to Claire's embarrassed face, to the moment she begged me not to make her uncomfortable by existing too loudly. Neither of us understood then what we understand now. Aging was never the tragedy. Abandoning yourself was. I looked out toward the endless ocean and smiled softly. Because after everything, the betrayal, the humiliation, the grief, the fear, I had finally learned something beautiful. Maybe acting my age finally meant learning I still deserved a life of my own. If there's one thing this journey taught me, it's that women are often told their value has an expiration date. We're praised for sacrificing, nurturing, supporting, and shrinking ourselves for others until one day we wake up and realize we no longer recognize the woman staring back at us in the mirror. But getting older is not the end of your story. It's not failure. It's not irrelevance. And it certainly isn't permission for the world to stop seeing you. Whether you're 50, 60, 70, or beyond, you are still allowed to want joy. you are still allowed to fall in love. Take risks. Start over. Wear the red dress. Drive the car. Take the trip. Or finally choose yourself after decades of choosing everyone else. And if someone makes you feel invisible because of your age, remember this. People who are afraid of aging will always fear women who age unapologetically. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever felt invisible because of your age? Or have you ever had to rediscover yourself after years of putting everyone else first? Tell me where you're watching from and what time it is there. And if this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, subscribe, and join me for more stories about family healing, heartbreak, and second chances. You are not too old to begin again.